Dodge County has a new sheriff in town tonight. Good evening. I'm Brian Mastery. The man who held the post for the last few years resigned today after pleading guilty to a federal charge of fraud. First Alert 6's Philip Katafamo is live in the newsroom with where things stand on finding a permanent replacement. Philip?
Brian, after a brief closed session this morning, the Dodge County Board of Supervisors unanimously accepted Dustin Weitzel's resignation. An investigation revealed Weitzel wired more than $45,000 from Dodge County Fraternal Order of Police Lodge account into his own personal accounts. This was when he was serving as treasurer for the union. Weitzel transferred back most of that money to the union before he was investigated. He admitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office to moving the money to prevent overdrafts to his personal accounts. He agreed to surrender his certification and to not work as a law enforcement officer in the future as part of the plea agreement. Because there is no chief deputy at Dodge County, the county board voted unanimously to appoint former Sheriff Bob Reynolds as interim sheriff. Reynolds served in the same interim role before Weitzel was elected.
So the interim sheriff would step into the position with the exact same salary and benefits that the outgoing sheriff had. There's no authority for the county board to make any adjustments in that regard. So that the interim sheriff will continue in that position until a new sheriff is elected.
Weitzel was set to run unopposed for re-election this fall. The Dodge County attorney, who you just heard from, says Weitzel has filed paperwork to take his name off the ballot. Now, the local Republican Party is in charge of finding a replacement candidate. The deadline to find a new candidate is September 1st. The party will meet in just a few weeks to work out what those next steps will look like. In the newsroom, I'm Philip Katafamo, First Alert 6. Back to you, Brian.
Philip, thank you. A few more notes on this. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud. Weitzel already agreed to pay $4,700 in restitution. He'll be sentenced October 1st and faces up to 20 years in prison. But what does that really look like? Well, based on the sentencing agreement as examined by First Alert 6 Investigates, if Dustin Weitzel gets credit for accepting responsibility, the government is poised to suggest to the judge a sentencing range of 0 to 6 months in federal prison.